Hi guys, and welcome back to the Virtually Expo coverage. We have a real treat for you now. We have a bit of a panel, okay? So we have Andrew, Johan, Niles and Dave from Free League Publishing, and it's going to be a bit of a panel conversation, okay? So maybe we just bring up all of the speakers at the same time, Justin, if we can do that.
I can. Do me one favor.
And turn me off.
Yes, I need you to. I need to turn you off, Warren. I'm so sorry, buddy.
Oh, of course he does. So I will go into the meeting and I will stop my video.
Okay. I'm going to try and be clever with my alt-tabbing. And boom, we have all the guys.
Dave is going to lead this and moderate. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat room, guys. So if you have questions as they come to you during all of this, please feed them into the chat, and we'll feed them into the conversation as well, because we're going to be talking generally about horror in role-playing and the types of horror and the likes. Okay, so I'm monitoring the chat at the moment. I just want to do a shout out to Geek Native. He's one of my favorite blogs out there. Hello, mate.
Hello.
It's good to see you in the chat. Right. So Dave, Niels, Johan, and Andrew, I will pass over to you guys. Please lead the way. Horror in role playing.
Yeah, thank you. And welcome everybody to the Free League panel talking about horror in role playing. I'm Dave Seamark, freelance RPG writer and editor and co-host of the Effect podcast. I'm the moderator for today. On the panel, the experts we have are three of the great minds behind three recent horror publications from Free League. We have Andrew E.C. Gasker, setting writer of the award-winning Alien RPG and lead writer of the scenarios Chariot of the Gods and Destroyer of Worlds. We have Johan Noor, one of the two creators of the award-winning Merkboya. Not a bad try, not a bad try.
That's actually pretty bad. But yeah.
And responsible for the fabulous artwork and graphic design. And last but certainly not least, we have Niels Hintzer, the writer of the sure to be soon award-winning Versen. So welcome everybody. Did you wish to briefly just introduce yourselves, Drew?
I mean, you just introduced me.
Is there anything else you wanted to say?
No.
Another thing.
I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of awards going on here at Free League, and I think this is fantastic.
Yeah, cool. Johan and Niels, anything you want to add to the very, very brief bio I gave you?
Not really. I think maybe.
Do you know what I'm going to suggest? I think one of you is breathing heavily into your microphone.
I'm guessing Niels.
It might be Niels with the headset. So if you can just
Tilt
move
it forward
the microphone a little bit away from your.
There you go, buddy.
Let's try that.
Yeah. Or just stop breathing. Like that's
the easiest solution.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Well, let's get straight into it. So, there are a hell of a lot of horror role-playing games out there. We've got 3 games that have horror in one form or another represented here today. So the first question, I think we're going to talk about horror in role-playing generally. Why do we love horror role-playing? Johan, do you want to kick off for us?
I think, why do we love horror in media in general? Like it's the same thing with like horror movies and books and whatnot. But I think like especially with games, it's kind of because you don't have this script that you can rely on. Like there's no guarantee that someone will lead the way. Like it's up to you. So I think that interactivity and the fact that if you mess up, it's your own fault.
What is it you think that, what is it about horror that really attracts players to horror rather than other genres?
I think it's...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Drew.
I think it's just... It's so different than what you expect because Dungeons & Dragons has led the way. And, that's action and adventure. And then every time you get players playing this, they're just really confused. And at first they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean I'm going to die? And then they get really excited that they're going to die. So it's a totally different experience. And it totally is that same thrill ride that you get from a really good horror film, where you're really worried what's going to happen to my character now instead of what's going to happen on the screen. So I think that's really exciting.
Like the thrill of danger and
I think also for many players, including me, immersion is the main thing. mean, getting into another world and leaving this. And I think it's kind of easier if you have that tension that you get in horror than in a kind of action game. It's easier to just block out reality and just sink in if there's something big bad coming to get you. And I also think it's many of the more ordinary scenes get better in horror than in other games. I mean, if you're playing Alien and you and your wife are cooking dinner on a spaceship and everyone knows there is an alien on this ship, your conversation will be great, whatever you talk about, if you speak about ordinary things. So to me, I think it's almost easier to have fun in horror games because it creates a tension and some kind of electricity.
And it's almost that promise of, something bad will happen eventually, because that's the whole idea of the game. Everyone is on board with that. So pretty much signed up to fail almost, or to try to not fail.
We have a quick fire question in the chat. Do the panelists prefer to play a horror RPG or run one?
Play or lead? Was that a question?
Yeah, so do you prefer to play the horror RPG or run one? The question, the person that asked the question says he loves to do both, but he really enjoys watching his players start to panic as the tension increases. So
yeah.
For me personally, as someone who's writing this, it's like I just want to play. I don't want to run a game after I've written a game. It's like, I want to feel what it's like to be in the hot seat instead. So.
I played my first game of Alien a couple of weeks ago, having GM'd it loads, and the first time I felt the pain of a head bite death. So, got myself in the backside ultimately in the end. But I love GMing. I think I get more satisfaction from GMing personally. But that does depend on the great players, actually, who make my job much easier in a horror setting.
I absolutely agree. Like, I figured out quite recently that I don't think I really like playing role-playing games. I just want to run them. Because I'm always the GM, and I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I GM'd for 22 years, and then now I started doing this professionally, and I don't want to GM anymore. So it's like I'm done with that.
I think I'm also mostly a GM, but at the moment I like playing much more. And I often get tired of the things I'm writing myself, so I seldom want to play them. As a GM, I rather play them as a player and see what other people can do with them. It's like as if I put all I can into the text and I can't produce more.
No.
I'd rather GM other people's text.
So we talked a little bit about one of the things that attract players to horror is the payoff at the end. There's something bad going to happen, the horror element of it. Do you think that sort of humor, parody, sort of collaborative experiences, these kind of things are a big draw in horror games as well?
I do. I think so. If I may just steal the microphone here, but because I think if we talk about Mörkborg, for instance, it's kind of an odd bird here, really, because we don't talk about it as a horror game, really. It's more of a kind of dark fantasy, apocalyptic, or almost like a dark horror comedy, almost. Because every time that we've played it, it's been pure, terror and misery in the game, but we're laughing our asses off at the table. So it's kind of that sweet sort of contrast and mix that I think that you need to have in some way. Like if everything is bleak and just dark, nothing is. So
yeah,
and I believe that humor is important to switch it up a bit.
There is one game I particularly love called 10 Candles, which is a game in which you are going to die. There is no two ways about it, and you are narrating the story of your death. And that's a brilliant collaborative experience where it's the fun of creating the story together. It's not so much the horror, or it's the kind of get to the dramatic point of how you die in the most exciting or dramatic or sacrificial way. It's a great collaborative experience.
Kind of the same thing with Mörkborg, actually. You know that everything is going to end. But, just like in real life, I mean, we know that.
That's
one big horror story.
Is that bringing the conversation down a bit there?
That's just how it is.
How about you, Drew? In Alien in particular, how do you feel? in that sense with sort of horror, sort of the black humor and the parody element of players enjoying the game?
I mean, I guess what it comes down to is like everybody seems to be telling amazing stories about how they were scared and died, and which is just it really. Oh my God! I can't believe that this happened to me. And everyone. So there's this huge fun behind it. At the same time that they're scrambling to keep their character alive. So it is like this. It is like a dark humor thing. And a bunch of fans have been sending me messages telling me things that happened in Destroyer when they ran it. And like some of the things that the players do when they panic is just ridiculous. And everybody's having a great time at the table. And you would think that it would be all bleak and everything, but it's not. Horror does both of you. It's like it's that little tension laugh that you have, when you're watching a horror film and someone makes a little joke. If it's done right, it just relieves the tension just a little bit enough for you to get hit again. If it's done wrong, it becomes just a parody and that's it. So it's been so much fun watching and listening to people's experience with Alien, and it's just not what I expected because I'm used to the Dungeons and Dragons crowd, and I love Dungeons and Dragons. When I DM for 22 years, that's mostly what I was DMing. Yeah. But everybody's just like angry. If their character dies, they flip a table. Now everybody's excited to get the next character sheet instead.
Yeah.
We have a question in from the chat here that is quite interesting. So for you guys, horror RPGs, do they lend themselves to campaigns, or do you feel that they lend themselves better to kind of like one-shots?
Good question.
Well, with Alien, we've been doing the cinematic scenarios, and they seem to be doing really well. But we're also been working on campaign stuff, and I think with something like Alien, at least, like the alien has to become something special, like a reward. Like if you're doing campaigns with these characters, you have to explore the whole universe that's going on, different aspects of it, and then when the alien shows up, he can still be terrifying. Because if every encounter is another alien, it's not going to be exciting anymore. So, but I really think that campaign play works well because we've developed the universe as much as we have with all the source material that was already out there that pre-existed, comics and novels and everything. So, honestly, I'm excited to see what people are going to do with the campaign books that we put out. But cinematic scenarios, it's you're lucky if one person gets out alive, and it becomes a totally different type of experience. So.
Nils, how do you feel from a Versen perspective on that question?
I think, of course, it works both ways, but I prefer it as a campaign game, building your base and learning more. And but I think you got to have some focus on developing the player characters along the way, like having players that want to have characters that change and grow and break apart, and you have to have that for the campaign to work, I think.
I think this is becoming a really nice segue into kind of the second question that we were going to talk about, which is kind of the types of horror that you get and the types of horror games you get. So I think there's a spectrum of sort of games. At one end, you've got the likes of Cult, pretty hard, get the book and, it's pretty graphic stuff. So you know what you're getting yourself into, all the way down to, I guess, teenagers playing Cthulhu, maybe like I did back in the day, where, okay, it's Cthulhu and you might have bad stuff going on, but it doesn't feel like that hard kind of horror game. And I think with the three games we've got here, we've kind of got games at different places on that spectrum. I think so. How do you feel? I mean, let's start again with you, Nils, about in terms of where do you feel Versen lands on that spectrum and the kind of sort of horror, Nordic horror that's being represented in your game?
I think it's quite far from Cult. And someone talked about it as a fairy tale horror. I think that is really good. If you look at like the Little Mermaid, not the Disney version, but the real version.
Well, that was quite horrifying, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's horrible. She ends up walking the earth, but every step she takes, she gets like knives in her feet. It's like a gritty, hard world, but it's reality, and it's it's not like in your face all the time. So it's. I know Thomas Hanstam said cozy horror, and then I don't know if it's pronounced as well to English, but yeah, you have a good time most of the time. It's about mysteries.
I think it kind of strikes me that I haven't played it yet, but having looked at it, there are ways of dealing with and resolving the problem that you're facing without it being a fight or being killed. Yeah. And it's kind of, the Versen are often unhappy about something that has happened to them kind of inadvertently. Humans have behaved badly without realizing it, and it's about working out what that is. So it's a different kind of resolution to, say, Alien, Drew. Where do you think Alien comes on that spectrum?
I mean, it's here's what the balance is that your players know what this alien's going to do. Okay, so it has to be you find a way to scare the players with what they know. Okay, and that's what makes it difficult. So in that case, it's not a fantasy. It's to me, it's just survival is what Alien is, and as a successful GM, you totally have to throw them a curveball in some way, shape, or form. So would that count as cult? I don't know how you would put that on the spectrum based on what I just said.
I think cult is probably quite a long way out to the left.
Yeah.
There might be a long gap between the worst game and then cult. The worst game, possibly.
Drew, that actually ties in to another interesting question that came in on the chat. And you guys might be able to advise, right? How do you keep a horror atmosphere going if the players maybe have a tendency to giggle or to laugh or whatever? Horror relies very much on the atmosphere building. So, like, are there any tips that you guys would have for GMs on how you kind of establish that atmosphere and get the vibe going?
I think you need to want to be afraid. I think you need to want to be scared. It's pretty much the same with campfire horror stories, and or horror movies. Like, if you don't want to be afraid, you're not going to be. So
yeah.
Sometimes when I have run horror games, I have from time to time told the players, "Oh, remember, you have to be scared." Not say it like that, but just a short reminder that everyone is here for the same reason. We want to feel that horror tension.
It demands cooperation.
It is
absolutely. Yeah. But then again, I don't think it's a bad thing that you can giggle a little, then be scared, then giggle a little. You got to have room for all that as well. Going in and out of the mood, kind of.
Yeah, definitely.
See, what's interesting with Alien is that there's always a player or two who has information that the others don't, that the GM sort of needs to pass them along the way. And one of the things I was seeing in the groups the other day was, well, how do you pass it along without everybody realizing that this is the guy you can't trust? And so I just suggested, first of all, do it in text messages on the phone, but also send text messages to everyone. So send someone a text message that says, so-and-so keeps rubbing his nose. Okay. Am I supposed to know what that means? Why is he rubbing his nose? Is this a clue? So you make everybody paranoid at the table, so they're laughing, but then you literally are starting to develop, should I watch that guy? Is he okay? And some of these messages may have absolutely nothing to do with it, but everybody sees everyone getting messages and no one knows what to think. So it to me, that it's about establishing that you better watch out at the table.
I think those kind of details are amazing, and you can also have that when you, if you play just dungeon delving, which you will do in Merkborg, you can rely on these quite unnecessary details and these questions as a GM. If they open a door, I will ask them, so which hand do you use to open the door? Did you wear a glove? It's just a normal door, but they're not going to know that. They're going to be paranoid.
It's like the other thing of as a GM, just rolling a bunch of dice behind the screen every now and then and going, and then carrying on.
Kind of building the enigma, putting in more question marks. Because when you relieve, or what do you say, when you get the answers to things, the horror is kind of over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I think also the PvP, the player versus player point, I think is a really good one, in that if you really want to build up the tension at the table, having everyone suspect everybody else gets them going really in a way that it's much harder to get that going in a group that knows that they automatically trust one another.
And make sure the stakes are high always. Like kill the PCs if you need to. Like let them know that they're not heroes; they're victims.
Yeah, I think
that's why we have extra characters ready to go in the wings.
Yeah.
I think contrast is a real important thing between like weak player characters and difficult, hard monsters, and you have that in all of these games. I mean, in Mörkborg, you play a scoundrel, worthless, and the world will end. And in Alien, you're a marine maybe, but you still can put up a fight. And in Vaesen, it's the same thing. You have this contrast where you can actually not measure up to the threats that you're facing, and that is important.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing there about you have hope that you can hold it off for a while, or you might be able to escape from it, but actually, you can't go toe to toe at any point because you're outmatched. Cool. We were talking about the game styles. The one thing we didn't talk about was Mörkborg on that. Sorry, that was even worse than my first attempt, wasn't it?
No, just don't worry about it.
This is so embarrassing. So in terms of where you think your game, Johan, sits on that scale, and how it feels from that point of view.
Yeah, like again, it's kind of weird because it's not explicitly horror in a way. It's dark fantasy, but I think the imagery and the kind of world that we use is horrific, and it uses a lot of. We're quite self-aware and self-parodying almost in a way, or it's so over the top. Everything is cranked up to 11, and we have it's like extreme gothic horror mixed with camp, 80s horror movies, heavy metal album covers, and I don't know. We don't take it too seriously, and I don't think you should with Grimdark.
Yeah,
because it doesn't work if it's too serious all the time.
Is there one thing I was going to mention a moment ago? How do you think sort of game rules and mechanics can add to that horror atmosphere? So sort of kind of harking back to that previous question about how you keep the tension at the table. How do the games? What's the best thing for a game to do in terms of sort of mechanical terms to keep that? I mean, Alien is a great example with stress, Drew, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I mean, the stress thing is what is definitely amazing to me. When I saw the mechanic being developed, I was just like, okay, this is great. Because you're always going to have that person at the table who's like, yeah, I saw the movies. I can take them. I know what's going on. But their character is not going to be doing what that player is doing. The player has to adapt to that. And that's great, because otherwise you're just going to it's going to turn into a hack fest. You don't want that. So, the stress mechanic in Alien is fantastic. I've been really impressed watching people fall apart at the table. So.
How about Vaesen, Nils?
It has a similar stress mechanic, not the same, but it's kind of has that thing with you roll dice to see how you react, and you can fall apart and stuff. And I think I'm all for light rules in almost everything, but I can see that in horror RPGs you can need that help as a player to let go of control, to let go of your player character. It's not that easy all the time. So those kind of mechanics can help you do what you got to do to feel scared.
I would actually argue the exact opposite, but
okay, yeah, go ahead. Excellent. What's what we want to hear?
No, but I mean, I understand your point, and it's true. But I personally have been most afraid when we have just freeformed and there's no rules at all and no like system to rely on to save or hurt you. Like it's just your imagination together. But yeah, it's kind of depending on the game, I think, and the setting and everything.
I also think it depends on how experienced your players are, because when people are first sitting down at the table for this, and I've noticed that with Alien, that's definitely something that's going on. People are like, "Well, I love Alien, but I've never role played," so it's been a gateway drug, and I meant that in a good way. But it's without that stress mechanic, I don't know if they would know how they're supposed to play in a role playing game. It immediately gives you something to role play, and you can start to learn that. And then I think More smorgasbord. That was my best. is like would be more advanced than you're not going to have the stress mechanic in that. So it depends on what audience, how you're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Then another thing, not related to stress mechanics or anything, but I believe that if you have a quite fatal system like the one we have, where you may have you end up in a couple of fights, you have 1 HP, a sword does D6. You are afraid of losing your character and having to like start over again. So you're actually afraid at the table to like.
Yes.
So
that's
yeah. I think that's quite possibly one of the great things in some of the other Free League games. I think Forbidden Lands is a great example where Coriolis as well, where the your characters are so weak, it does change the way you approach a situation or an encounter completely. And I've never run away in a role-playing game as much as I've run away in Forbidden Lands. Getting very, very good at it. And my character's a tank as well, so it's like, I think that's a really
Tank's
great.
gone.
Yeah, it's a really great point though. If you have players who care about their characters and their character, they really think they're going to die, then you get that tension.
But I think that the important part is the fragility of it, because we played some horror in Tales from the Loop, and I mean, you can't die, but you're just as fragile because you're just a kid against this horror. So you could either create it with rules, your HP is going down, or you can just play.
Yeah, narratively.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good because you can have a game where there is a horrible outcome, but it's not the death of the character. It might be that they get moved away from town because their parents got fed up with them hanging around with those bad kids down the road, but they're out of the campaign. But
I think the key point is like you have to lose something that you value.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Especially in campaigns, like in long campaigns, you have built something, you kept it for a long time, and you really like it, your character or whatever it is, and then you lose it. That's really terrifying for a player.
Yeah.
We have another question in the chat. Is there a horror RPG that the team at Free League would like to wrap their professional arms around to produce a new edition for? There's one to put you on the spot.
Who's got the official answer here then? Because it's not me.
to make a new, better version of it. That's both like compliment and diss in a way.
I can give some kind of answer. Väsen is actually when it was presented to me, do you want to write this? They presented it as a modern version of Chock. I think it was Chill, and
Chill.
It was a game I loved when I grew up. It was the first game I played and stuff. So Väsen is kind of a new shape of that childhood game. Chock. But in other games, I don't know.
No, they're already good as they are. I wouldn't touch them. Coward answer.
It's a very, very cowardly diplomatic answer there. That's
Okay, Alien.
But I actually I love Call of Cthulhu. I love I love a lot. I think they're good as they are.
A quick question for you, then. Have you ever considered using additional elements to increase the horror atmosphere at a gaming table?
So from my point of view, not often, no. I know a lot of people do like to have sort of ambient lighting and sound effects and all the rest of it. For me, I did try that back in the day once in a while. I found it kind of got in the way of the game rather than help, but maybe it was just the way that we were running it. But I know a lot of people do like to have that kind of thing to help their game along.
I have actually played, now that I think about it, an adventure where the player characters were trapped in this labyrinth maze and were chased by a monster, and that worked very well on Roll20. It wouldn't have worked as good in real life because here you had the dynamic lightning thing. You can only see as far as your character can see.
Yeah.
Maybe that. Otherwise, I don't think so.
Any thoughts, Drew or Neil?
Recently on one of the groups, I saw somebody was saying that they prefer to role play in person, but because of COVID, they've been unable to. So they took the time to turn their basement into the Nostromo. And I was looking at what they did, and I was like, this is amazing. I mean, he even took flat screens and he built like a computer, like an old monitor back for the flat screen monitor. So I was like, okay. And I thought playing in that would be pretty awesome, because if you're sitting there immersed in everything, you can't help but feel like you're part of it. But like I said before, the biggest thing to me is would be just passing notes that have nothing to do with it necessarily. I think that really it is an added thing that is not necessarily the rules, but just helps you to increase paranoia. So I think mood is really important. You don't necessarily have to build the Nostromo in your basement to get that mood, but more power to you if you do. I asked them to my basement. So.
There's a game called This Discord Has the Ghosts in It, which I haven't played, but it uses Discord as a format to tell horror stories, or you play horror game that way. So I think you can definitely experiment with different formats and different mediums and use digitally if you want to.
So moving on to horror themes then. I mean, we've talked a bit about that spectrum of horror. So Johan, Merkboyer, sort of post-apocalypse dark fantasy, you say. Does it fit into that sort of apocalyptic theme?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Glad that you asked. No, but
well, you told me to write it down on this bit of
good question. No, but so I think because Merkboyer is an apocalyptic game where the world is ending and there's no saving it. You can't do anything about it. There's this doomsday prophecy that tells you how the world will end. And so right from the start, all the players know that all their efforts are kind of in vain. Like there's no point really in doing anything. But as I was saying in the beginning, that's just like in real life, you know? You know that the world is ending with that.
Ouch, there's no point in real life. That was a great
But there is. I mean, you have the very severe climate crisis, but still you just keep trucking, you know. So it's kind of the same thing here, but you have this sort of over this ever looming threat of total annihilation. And as reality sort of breaks down, dream become truth and truth become dream, and you can have all these kind of horrific stuff going on. And I think, that promise of death can be terrifying.
Promise of release.
Is that going to be the tagline for this panel now? The promise of death can be terrifying. So do we think that the kind of the zombie apocalypse thing is done now? Is there anywhere else to go from Merkboyer in a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic kind of?
There isn't a post-apocalypse in our apocalypse. It just ends like that. That's the idea. You burn the book once you're done, because the world, it's like the nothing in a never-ending story, you know.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, all writers of post-apocalyptic and zombies will have to readdress the realism, because now we know in apocalyptic scenarios we actually go out and buy toilet roll in vast amounts.
No, I actually saw someone try to return what they bought at one point. It's just like, what?
So it's the fact that we have went through a dry run now of a post-apocalypse. You know, I think we all know exactly how it's going to happen. So you know, we'll have to have toilet roll mechanics now built into our RPGs. So
I shall look forward to that shopping game coming out. The game where the currency in the world is toilet paper.
Too real.
Yeah. What other themes do we think we're sort of looking at? I mean, we've got I think Alien is sort of kind of future dystopia a little bit by the way that the kind of humanity is run, the corporate power. Kind of the horror of what humanity does to humanity, as well as what is out there in the dark that's causing problems. Is there how much sort of running room is there left for that kind of theme in horror, or are we looking for kind of a new, really original sort of route turn to make in future horror gaming?
I mean, we get more and more towards that future every day. So, you know, you see more shocking things going on in the real world, and for me, like, they inspire it drastically. So, just like, I mean, with the zombie apocalypse thing, also, it's like these things have to evolve to be relevant for you. That's what it comes down. And if you keep evolving it by staying aware of what's going on now, and translating that into, okay, where's that going to go? I think that it's always going to be relevant to play gaming, because you see it coming. Let's explore what that would be.
Yeah. And Nils, I mean, taking the kind of, sort of supernatural theme, which is kind of very much sort of where Versen's coming from, is there wider kind of Nordic supernatural themes that you'd want to get into in further productions for Versen, like supplements or anything, or where do you think you could take the supernatural theme in?
I don't know really. Now I don't really get what you mean, actually. What do you mean?
Okay, I think just thinking about themes for horror. So supernatural is obviously a theme for horror. Versen fits quite well within that. There's quite a lot of games out there that rely upon the supernatural for their for their IP. There are some very big ones, the sort of the White Wolf, World of Darkness, Vampire Masquerade, all of that kind of stuff is a good example. Is there, Versen seems to have slipped into a bit of into a gap in the market, where I'm just trying to think, have you got any thoughts about where that is? Then, where are the open fields and the wide vistas for supernatural themes to go in future? I guess it's a very, very long-winded way around of getting to a question.
I don't know.
If you want to say it's a shit question, move on. Then
yeah, maybe it is. I'm sorry, but I don't really get it. I don't think it's. I don't think the game is so much like a Vampire or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or. I mean, you have the supernatural monsters and everything, but you don't play a monster. And I never thought about that. There could be similarities to White Wolf. Maybe it could, but I think it's more close to Call of Cthulhu than you're going out there in the unknown. I mean, on one level, Versen is about industrialization and the new world emerging. I mean, it's an old world dying where the Versen existed, and now the cities are growing, and so it's kind of post-apocalyptic as well, on a symbolic level, that the old world is going, and to the characters, the old world is strange and odd and dangerous, and they're leaving their safe haven in the city to go out and explore. So I think it's more that than the supernatural, because is that some kind of answer?
no, that's cool. Well, let's move on to something much safer then. So,
actually, before you move on, I do have a sort of like a question wrapped up in this. One of the most frightening books that I have ever read was wrote by the Vatican's chief exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth. And the reason it was frightening was not necessarily because of the horrible stuff that he had faced. It was the fact that he wrote about the supernatural in ways that to him it was as real as a bowl of cornflakes is to us. So in terms of taking something like that, where it's a supernatural, but its scariness is based on almost it's pulling it down to a sense of reality. It's almost like a John Constantine kind of a thing. How might something like that be tackled, or is there basically you need that little bit of fantastical in there in order to allow the game to flourish? There's one for you. It's probably a non-question as well, but well.
You seem to ask a lot of those.
I understood it. Obviously, you and I are on the same wavelength for really long-winded and difficult questions.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
But from my point of view, I think a lot of games, that almost becomes implicit. When, so let's say Call of Cthulhu, you play your investigator, you don't believe everything, you see a dimensional shambler, you believe. So I think in these things, your characters move from a non-believer to a believer through the experiences that they get in the adventures that they go through.
Yeah, I think because you said something like he wrote it as if it was real to him.
It was completely real to him.
I think maybe you could get inspired by that when you write role-playing games, that you don't talk about something as if you were a game writer. You talk about it as if you are a person in that world, in a way. That's kind of what we have done in Mörk Body, because you can't really trust anything that's written in a book, because it's not written like a traditional role-playing game book. It's not like these are the facts. It's more like hinted at. And so I think you could, if you treat it as if the book is written in game in a way, that could possibly.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I approach writing the stuff for the adventures for Alien, I'm approaching it as a novelist rather than approaching it thinking about a game. Because there was, like, in Chariot of Gods, there was this horrific birth scene for one of the aliens that I wrote, and if you just say, okay, so the guy's head pops open and this thing comes out, it's like, it's not the same as that if you read it the way I wrote it in the thing, because I've had GMs tell me that their players got sick at the table reading it, and that helped it be, more immersive. So I guess if you thought this was real, or you felt this was real, you could get that really get that going on in mood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, very much so. That's an interesting point. That kind of, again, nice segue. Tips for people who want to write horror role-playing games. What would your top tip be for someone who wants to embark on writing games, role-playing games in the horror genre? Niels, any thoughts?
I think this is the best tips that you just said. You got to create mood. That's the most important thing. And I think games are getting better at that. That's a development that's happening right now, that more and more games are coming out that works with layout and works with in-game texts and stuff. So that is much more important than getting the facts right, kind of.
That's one of the things you mentioned, the layout and everything like that. When you pick up that Alien book, there's no question that this is going to be a dark, disturbing universe, because of the layout, and the majority of the black on the pages, and it just fits perfectly with the theme, space horror. So yeah, but we're trying to answer how do you talk about writing? Again, it just comes down to mood. I think Nelson, right? It's make sure that it's not just sterile writing. Is what it comes down to. Make sure you're putting some emotion in there. Some look at something that scares you, and adapt that to the story you're trying to put.
And as you were saying, sorry, Nils, did you wanna?
No.
As you were saying, don't just limit it to the text. Let that mood that you find in that tone of voice, just run through everything, from the images to the layout to the equipment lists, whatever. Everything needs to breathe that sort of theme. And also, don't give answers. Give just directions and incomplete truths.
I think it's an interesting question, the difference between RPGs and novel writing or movies and stuff. How you create, what's it in English, dramaturgy? Dramaturgy?
Yeah, dramatic tension.
Yeah, dramatic tension. Yeah, but also like the how it starts, how is it goes down, and like the whole
structure of the
structure. And I think you can do mistakes by trying to copy it right off from novel writing or from movies. How do you create scary scenes? I mean, we all know it's no good to just script it. Then that's happened. But how do you do it? I think I think that's an interesting question. I don't have any big answers to you, but
I think one thing for me is try and be unpredictable. If you can throw a twist in there or turn something that seems very mundane suddenly into something that's no longer from the normal world, or it's your normal world is there and suddenly you've been moved over here to where your normal world doesn't apply anymore for some reason.
I think one thing is unpredictability, because in a good movie, in a good novel, you need something unpredictable. Something needs to happen that turns everything around. But what people, I think, forget sometimes is that the players, they are the unpredictability in role-playing games.
Exactly.
You don't need a big shift. You don't need a big turnaround always, because you're going to play it and they don't get the clues. And you're like, get the clues, and suddenly they do, and whoa, it's the big moment. And that wasn't in the script from the start. So I think you can write scenarios that are kind of straight up and simple in structure, as long as they're open, because then the unpredictability will come in from the players.
I don't think you shouldn't write scripts. You shouldn't think of it that way. Just write locations or ifs and thens, and just give the players tools and toys to create their own horror, because that's, as you were saying, they are the unpredictability. And
that's perfect. That's exactly something that I've tried to look at every adventure. It's like Chariot wound up being a lot bigger than it was supposed to be, and Destroyer just was over the top, a lot bigger. And one of the reasons why is because I sit there and thinking, okay, what's the craziest thing that the players would do with this? And how's the GM going to handle that? And can I give the GM like can I make the players really pay for that with something that the GM has to make happen in case that happens? Can that spiral into something that still leads towards where they need to go, even though it's the total out of left field what they would do? And actually, I think it was Dave. I think there were some things I put in Destroyer that Dave's like, players aren't going to do this. he had to turn me down a little bit. It was you who put those notes in, right, David? I think.
Yeah, I did a bit on that. Yeah. Sorry,
but no. It makes perfect sense, because I said, okay, in case they decided to steal the ship, and Dave's like, how would they steal the ship? And I was like, all right, never mind. I went too far.
Yeah.
So but in that way, you're right. You're writing scenes. You're anticipating. Okay, maybe if they did this scene would be cool. But in the end, they're going to be the ones who leave themselves around and create that unpredictability. And I'm just worried. Like I said with Alien, the GMs are maybe never GM'd before because they love Alien is why they're doing this. So I want to make sure that they have a way to see this, so that when they get to do their campaigns, they're like, oh, I know how to handle this now.
That's another wonderful segue, actually. People would think we scripted this, but we haven't. Yeah, you've been brilliant. So how do we make sure that horror role-playing is fun for all our players? Clearly, horror themes aren't going to be for everybody. How do we make sure at our table, and when people pick up the books that we contribute to or that we write, that it's going to land in the right way with the right people? Johan, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's important to know your players. Like if we're talking about making sure everyone's having fun and being comfortable, and I think you need to know your players and have maybe a session 0, use all the kind of safety tools that you have at your disposal. If it's just X cards, or if it's there was a tabletop role-playing game safety toolkit that recently won an Emmy for best free product. Stuff like that can help you a lot to make sure that everyone's having a good time.
Nils, Drew, any thoughts beyond that?
I segued it, so
you've done your part. I think it's if you're just. I agree with Johan on that stuff. I don't have anything more to say about that. But I think in all games, you can't put the responsibility to have fun on any other than the players themselves. Everyone at the table's got to take responsibility. To me, that was an important lesson I learned a couple of years ago that has increased my fun at all role-playing games. You can't the game or anyone else can do it. You got to do it yourself. You got to have fun no matter what you're playing, kind of.
Yeah, I think I think you're absolutely right, Johan, or both of you are, but on the knowing your players point. But I think when it comes to convention play, then you just need to be really clear that the themes that are going to be coming up in that scenario are really well flagged, so anybody who might be uncomfortable with them is aware and can then decide not to join your game. But I think there's also something about managing the moment. We had last year at UK Games Expo, we were running some Alien games, and this was in the open hall. It was all the space we had, and I was running a game, and I was just about to launch into a very graphic description of the death of one of the characters at the hands of an alien. And I looked over my shoulder, and there was like an 8-year-old girl watching.
Oh, gotta start somewhere.
Who just wandered by with her dad. I thought, okay, we'll delay that description for a couple of minutes until they move on to the next store. So I think that's maybe a very, very kind of unique situation. But I think the point is a good one. It's just sort of managing the moment, making sure that you're pitching your description at the right level, trying to judge what you think your players will appreciate and will find fun, and then leave it there. Don't try and shock your players, certainly not with a horror game, because you may shock them a step too far, potentially.
Yeah, it's super important.
We're coming down to the last few minutes here, guys. Is there anything else anybody would like to chip in that we haven't covered?
I think I might have something. One thing I'm curious about is the ability of players to actually fight against the overarching threat. Do they have to run away and hide, or are they able to stand up to it and be a superhero, or is it somewhere in the middle? How that would actually affect the aspects of the horror in the game?
No superheroes. That's not scary if you can beat the big bad, in my opinion.
I think in Alien, I think it's in the middle somewhere, and Drew, shout if you disagree. But I think a group of players who know the threat is coming and then prepare and plan a trap, then they have a chance of defeating an alien. A bit different if it's a Colonial Marine game, because you are there to shoot aliens. But for your standard worker, no, 1-to-1, you're a dead man. 5-to-1, you're a dead man. 5-to-1, if you plan a trap and you do lots of interesting and innovative role-playing stuff, yeah, then you've got a chance.
Well, I mean, with Alien, I mean, even Ripley only made it through 3 movies. Spoiler, before she died, you know. And it's always like
Ripley's dead.
I know. Sorry, like 30 years spoiler, 25 years spoiler, whatever. So you got to expect this isn't going to go well. And another thing is that, you know, people give Alien 3 an issue because of this, but like at the end of Aliens, you know, we succeeded. Hicks and Newt are in cryosleep, and they're dead at the beginning of Alien 3, because that's horror. That's like brutal. Hey, you may have won, but you didn't win. This is coming. And if your players understand that that's what it's going to be, it's a good thing. So you know, you have an expectancy on how long you're going to make this. And so if you look at Alien was a cinematic scenario, but Alien 1, 2, and 3 was the campaign. So your time is up.
Any thoughts on that, Nils?
I mean, in Vaesen, you most often cannot defeat Vaesen in combat. They do not die. I'm not a big fan of end fights, boss fights, and the likes. But I think as Johan said, you shouldn't be a superhero. I like superhero games, but that's not horror. That's another game. That could be a kick as well.
Then the enemies are afraid of you. That's not the point of horror, I think.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of our list of things we wanted to talk about. Do we just want to round off? Is there, Johan, Nils, Drew, is there anything you'd like just to say a couple of moments on what you're sort of working on now? What's coming up in the future? anything interesting to mention? Johan, did you wish to go first?
Sure. So we just had a Kickstarter for a thing called Mörkborg Cult Ferritory, which is a scene for community-made content that we released. It will hit stores soon-ish. And we're also working on a couple of other yet undisclosed projects. So you can expect more doom and gloom and gory death from us in the future. Absolutely.
Nils?
Yeah, some of the things from the Kickstarter is not out yet, like the music, and I know Graham Davis is writing something that will be really cool. And then there will come more mysteries, and we have a campaign planned and so on. So there will be a lot of stuff for Basin.
Brilliant, thank you. And Drew?
There's a lot of Alien coming. I'm working on some things for some other gaming stuff and a couple of graphic novels, but I cannot reveal what they are right now. But in regards to Alien, yeah, we have lots of we have lots of books coming. So if you love the game, expect to be horrified more and more.
Cool. Well, I think we've probably come to the end of our panel. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks to everyone who's been watching. Yeah, and hand back over to our studio friends.
Okay, guys. Look, thank you so much, guys. That was fascinating. I loved it.